According to the needs-based model of reconciliation, situations of transgression threaten the identity of individuals, both the identity of offenders and victims. But these threats to identity are different for offenders and for victims. For this reason, responses to offenders must necessarily be different from responses to victims. In this video, I propose that we compare the offenders and their victims on different dimensions: the identity threat they face, the emotion that follow, and the needs that this creates. The identity of human beings is constituted on several fundamental dimensions. The two dimensions that interest us here are the dimensions of morality and the dimension of assertiveness. Morality corresponds to the fact of perceiving oneself as a trustworthy person, as someone who is warm and morally respectful. Because of the transgression they have committed, offenders are often at great risk in terms of morality. You don't break a rule and you don't damage a relationship without damaging your image as a moral person. The offenders, therefore, experience a threat to their identity, which is located on the dimension of morality of this identity. The victims are in a completely different situations. They are threatened on a very different facet of their identity, the dimension of assertiveness. Assertiveness refers to the fact of perceiving oneself as a competent person who controls one's life and is able to influence this life. Having been subjected to the transgression, victims often feel that they have lacked control. They feel a sense of inferiority and powerlessness that threatens their identity on the dimension of assertiveness. These threats to identity produce different emotional feelings. While offenders may feel shame or guilt for their actions, they also feel a fair amount of anxiety. Indeed, human societies are often quick to banish those who transgress moral rules and social norms. As a result, offenders often run the risk of being rejected by those around them because of the wrongdoing they have committed. And this risk of rejection makes them quite anxious. Victims' emotional reactions are different. It will surprise no one that the prototypical emotion felt by victims is anger. Anger at having been treated unfairly, at not having been respected. But shame is also a prototypical emotion among victims. Or let's call it anger toward oneself for not having been able to prevent what happened or for having let it happen. Finally, there is a feeling of contempt towards the person who committed the transgression for the lack of morality that he or she inspires us. This threat to identity and the resulting feelings, therefore, lead offenders and victims to experience quite different psychological needs. For offenders, the most pressing need is to regain a positive social and moral identity. This need to restore a positive self-image is accompanied by a need to make sure that one is not socially rejected, that the people around still accept one's membership in their group. In contrast, the psychological needs of victims are in the assertiveness dimension. What victims need is to feel and experience a control for what is happening to them, and a feeling that they will be able to stop future transgressions. In other words, victim needs to regain a sense of self-worth, control, and self-determination. In addition to identifying the different needs felt by the conflicting parties, the need-based model of reconciliation suggests two things. First, the actions that both victims and offender take in the conflict situation are actions that are specifically intended to meet the specific psychological needs. On the one hand, the need for image restoration and the need to belong, and on the other hand, the need for control and self-determination. Second, the model also suggests that the tensions felt by the parties can only be relieved when the psychological needs are met. As long as the needs persist, the tension cannot be reduced and the conflict will continue to exist.